And so for 6 weeks, we're going to be talking about taking seriously the Bible's call, in Jesus' words, to follow after him in a way that would cause us to have life in all of its fullness. I don't know if that describes your understanding or experience of following Jesus. Maybe you're in the room and you're looking in on Christianity still. You're figuring out what you actually think about Jesus in relation to some other faiths. And if that's you and you're specifically here for this series, so good to have you in the room. And we're really hoping that this is going to be illuminating on your journey. Maybe you're a seasoned Christ follower and you can relate to this, or maybe it feels like this idea of thriving really needs a good dusting off in your life, and you're here hungry to just experience some freshness in the way you live as a Christ follower. Today I'm going to be talking specifically about thriving spiritually. Over the weeks we're going to be talking about thriving vocationally and relationally and physically and financially and all these good things. But thriving spiritually is surely a foundation to all other forms of thriving in our lives. And so I'm going to read the story that is often called the story of the lost son or the prodigal son, Luke chapter 15. I'm going to read a whole chunk of it. I want to encourage you to dial in whether you're very familiar with the story or not. It goes like this. Jesus continued, there was a man who had 2 sons, and the younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." And so he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had and he set off to Dubai or London or Perth. And there he squandered his wealth in wild living. And after he'd spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country and he began to be in need. And so he went and he hired himself out to a citizen of that country who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. And when he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' And so he got up and he went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and he was filled with compassion for him, and he ran to his son. He threw his arms around him and he kissed him. And the son said to him, 'Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe, put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet, and bring the fattened calf and kill it. And let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again, and he was lost and now is found.' And so they began to celebrate." I'm going to pull 3 points out of the story, but just 2 quick upfront introductory comments. The first is that I find this story really interesting. It's often called the story of the prodigal son or the lost son. And yet Jesus starts the story. He says, I want to tell you a story about 2 sons. And we actually don't have time to go into the second son this morning. But I think it's really helpful to realize that this is actually a story about 2 sons, neither of whom thrive spiritually. First, the first son, we see it, he's off in a foreign country, living it up wild, and in the end, he's in such a desperate place that he's in a pigsty, and it's quite clear to see this guy is not thriving. But interestingly, if we were to read on, we actually find the older brother, surprisingly, also not thriving spiritually. Because if we go and look into this party that is thrown, this rump steak braai for this younger brother, what we find is the older son outside of the party miffed at his dad for his gracious act of forgiveness towards the younger son, distanced from the family in a moment of great celebration. And it's interesting to me that actually you cannot thrive spiritually in different ways. One is wild living and, just living out and kind of wasting your life in dramatic and obvious ways. But the other way is to live with kind of a hyper-spiritual, hyper-religious, superior attitude that says, I got what I got through hard work and morality and staying in my Father's house. And you could relate more to one of those maybe than the other, but I'm going to spend my time on the first brother this morning. And then the second interesting thing about the story is it's unclear exactly who Jesus is telling the story to. Is this a story about a wayward Christian that has kind of gone a long way from his father and he's woken up and he's realized it's time to get back to my father? Or is this a story about someone who's kind of lived in the world distant from this father that he doesn't really know, who makes his way to the father? Well, it's impossible to tell. And I think that's good, because if you're not a Christ follower, this is a really good story that I think you'll be able to relate to. And if you are a Christ follower, but you're not thriving spiritually, there's this sense of distance from the Father, this is a really good story for you too. And so my 3 points this morning are: get fed up, own up, and offer up if you want to thrive spiritually. Let's talk about getting fed up. What I mean by this is actually that God, in His goodness, is committed enough to us to ensure that some of the seasons we go through in our lives will bring us to places where we're fed up with the status quo. Listen carefully how Jesus puts it in this story. After this young son had spent everything, there was severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. I mean, these are tragic circumstances, and yet there's something significant happening because of the circumstances. C.S. Lewis famously said this. He said that God whispers to us through our pleasures, but He shouts to us in our pain. Our pain is God's way of rousing a dead and deaf world to His purposes. We read that the son longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating. One of the church fathers said, inside of us there's a God-shaped vacuum that God alone can fill. And while I think most of us would agree with that as a statement, in theory, I think as human beings we're kind of wired to say that's probably true, but let me give it a good try, trying to fill this void with other things. And so often the narrative of our lives can be chasing after all sorts of things to find satisfaction and joy. Let me give the money thing a go. Let me give kind of the sexual liberation thing a go. Let me give other systems of belief a go. And God, in His mercy, will often allow us on the back end of those to reach a place where we, for all intents and purposes, are just fed up. And this does great good in this man's life. His response is to say, I will set out and I'll go back to my father. Something great is happening out of real pain and challenge. As I read the story, I'm just well aware that the pigsty reality can be a little bit difficult for us Cape Townians to see. I mean, this is clearly describing someone who's really down and out and destitute, and they're in desperate situations. And maybe you're in the room and you can't really relate to this. Maybe you're going like, dude, have you seen the city we live in? Pigsty is not really a great description. I mean, one weekend you can be swirling a Sauvignon Blanc from Dimmersdale at season of Sauvignon. The next you can be on the top of Contamans Cliff on your mountain bike. Then you can be rocking out to freshly ground at Kirstenbosch, followed a week later by watching a sunset on Llandudno Beach. I mean, life is good, isn't it? I mean, this is quite a place to live, barring a little bit of water shortage and the occasional reality. And what's really interesting is that my experience has actually been that God can kind of bring you to this place of being fed up one of two ways. The one is just kind of destitution and difficulty and crisis, but often He brings people here as well through just an incredible disjoint between the goodness of life and this feeling that there's more, that there's something fundamental that's missing amidst the goodness. And I know that is a more accurate description of my journey into Christ. At the age of 16, it wasn't so much that I was in this place. I certainly wasn't in a gutter with like narcotics needles lying around me. I was far too nerdy. My life was far too boring for those realities. And yet I was in a season of my life where things were incredibly sweet and getting sweeter. I lived in a home with a mom and dad that loved each other, and we had security and stability. I went to a great school. Shout out to Westville Boys High in Natal. I was was just fortunate that there was an area of my life I got a lot of recognition in, and so that was quite nice. I knew what I wanted to study. I knew I was going to do okay at it, and I knew that there were plenty of jobs on the other side of an engineering degree, and I was pretty much sorted for life. And had these great friends, really thoroughly enjoying life, and yet there was something like, surely all of these pointers, all the sum total of all these amazing things should just leave a deep satisfaction in my soul, and yet it didn't. And just God surprisingly brought me to this place of being really fed up in a really sweet season in my life. And so for whatever reason or in whatever context, thriving spiritually always has to involve getting fed up. And maybe you're not a Christ follower, and this series is just going to be helpful, it's just going to be timeless. And you just maybe honestly going, I actually am a little bit fed up. This disjoint, this lack of reality between what ought to be and how I really feel when I lie in bed at night alone with my thoughts. There's something wrong here. And maybe you're a Christ follower, and you just need to freshly get fed up. Because maybe you've known Christ, and you've lived in some good things, but the current reality, you wouldn't use this word, thrive, to describe what you're experiencing. Maybe Christianity in your current season would be more described by principles, morality, a recipe for my life to make things work, but it lacks the substance of deep soul satisfaction. And the good news is if you're feeling a little fed up and if you're feeling a little bit discontent, often that's a sign of the activity of God at work doing something, even in the frustration, even in the pain and the difficulty. And so this man gets fed up. And then the second thing is that he owns up. And what I mean by this is that thriving spiritually always involves getting real and honest with ourselves about our own failures and our own sin. Getting to a place beyond denying and blaming others, but realizing that amidst all the realities, there's some of our own failure and our own sin at play. Listen to how that happens in this story. Verse 17 says, when he came to his senses. Such a simple phrase, and yet it's so profoundly needed at times in our lives, isn't it? When he came to his senses. It's amazing just speaking to people who are involved in therapeutic journeys with people, therapists in the professional realm, how they all speak of this as being absolutely crucial in any journey. A person actually taking responsibility, saying, this is what it is. This is my involvement in this. There is a need for me to make some responses and make some changes. And it's like that moment is a moment that can take often a significant amount of time to come to. And at the rates professionals bill at, a significant amount of money. So get there early and save some money. A time of owning up. When he came to his senses. And look what he plans to say to his father, verse 21. Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. That's a powerful level of owning up. I think there's two things that really work against this in our culture, work against us owning up to some of the realities. The first is just entertainment and social media. These things keep us so distracted. You see, God actually put in us, by design, an ability to reflect deeply and honestly about where we are at life. But the problem with life these days is, you get beyond the busyness and the franticness and you find a bit of space and you start getting into that zone where you're thinking properly about life, thinking about something bigger than just the to-do list. And automatically we reach across at arm's length. There's a 4.5 to 6.5 inch screen with an infinite scroll capability, where we can just look at what everybody's doing, and we can download season 37, episode 503 of some fantastic thing to keep us amused. I'm not saying these are bad. They have their place in our society. But I think for a lot of us, one of our biggest fears is being alone with ourselves to think deeply about reality. I mean, what if I were to say to you, hey, I'm going to pick you up tomorrow morning really early. That would be weird because I don't know you, but imagine I knew you. I'm going to pick you up very early tomorrow morning. I'm going to drive you out of the city, and I'm going to drive you to this beautiful lake down this long dirt road, and then I'm going to leave you there, and I'm going to come back for you at sunset. Oh, and one more thing. Would you just give me that little device there? Because there's no cell phone reception here anyway. See, that thing is, I think, for many of us, a terrifying thought where that should be the most liberating 12-hour experience that many of us could have. This thing of entertainment and social media, we've got to get beyond it to a place where we think about the reality of life and we're able to own up. I think the other thing that works against this is an overly therapeutic culture. I'm a big fan of therapy processes that various professionals are involved in. Some of the people in this church and leaders in this church are involved professionally in that way. But if we make life just about that, if we make the sum total of life therapeutic reality, we can spend our whole lives going like, I am the way I am and things are the way they are because that person did that. And at an early formative stage in my life, that happened. Now, those are all realities. But unless we're combining that with what this guy does here, I've got something I can make right. Regardless, I mean, this guy think of all the things he could have said. He could have said, Dad, these idiot friends in Dubai let me down, dropped me. Stupid famine came along, messed up my plans. Dad, the way things were in our house back when I lived there were actually good reasons for me to leave. And it's amazing that he has this moment where he says, hey, there's probably a lot of circumstances outside of my control that leave me in a difficult place that aren't my fault or my responsibility. But there's at least one thing I can do. There's at least one bit of this I can take responsibility for, and I'm going to do that. And he owns up. I've sinned. I've made a bad decision. I've failed here. And I want to specifically speak to you if you're not a Christ follower. I mean, if you are a Christ follower, if you've been following Christ maybe for a while, maybe you think I'm speaking right now to people who are looking in on the faith, that things need to change in their life, but I'm speaking to us mostly. Because the reality in my life, 26 years of following Christ, is that left to my own devices, I don't drift towards spiritual thriving. I drift the other way, and things creep into my life that I've actually got to, on a regular basis, own up to and take responsibility for. I'll give you a recent example. Over the last year, I've just realized that I've got this thing in my life that I call the introvert excuse. Like I'm a hyper introvert. I'm one of those like weird people who can go sit in a restaurant all by himself and be supremely happy and not one bit awkward. Take myself to a movie and just love it. You know those people, extroverts are like, shame, the guy's life. Oh, what happened? But if I'm not careful, I can allow this just to become the sum total definition of my entire life. The fact that I'm an introvert, and I can miss out on beautiful scriptural realities like the fact that I'm supposed to walk in deep friendships with some people around me and be accountable and share my life and my thoughts with more than just the books in my study. And so this amazingly helpful agent in my life, by the name of Natasha Martin, my wife, just over the last year has just regularly asked me, how are your friendships going? And what are you doing to build authentic friendships? I've just freshly committed myself to making sure I'm not wandering through life overly isolated. There's some friendships here, people in Durbanville that I'm just being a little more intentional about. And then there's two like really close friends that moved to other parts of the world, and I'm just embracing the wonder of technology and going, dudes, I'm just going to be nagging you for Skype calls in your busy agendas. I want an hour of your month every month. I want us to connect about how our marriage is going, where we're at in terms of our hopes and dreams and fears and financial pressures and all these things. I want to do life with some people around me. It's just bringing such freshness and such thriving to something that I would totally miss out on if I weren't willing to go like where is it in my life that God has more for me? And what excuses am I making, and how am I going to get beyond those? The third thing we see in this story, it's just this beautiful reality of offering up. I want you to see the radical change of heart we see in this younger son. When he leaves his father's house, he says this, Father, give me. Father, give me. What he's saying is, hey, I know what I want from life. I'm self-centered. I'm in this for what I can get. Give me my share of the estate. In that culture, it would have literally been saying, I wish you were dead, but you're not. But could I have the money I'm getting when you die? Now, this is a self-centered man who lives his life by these words, give me. Look at the radical change, but Just one word that we see that's different when he arrives back. Verse 17, when he came to his senses, he said, I'll go back to my father and I'll say to him, Father, make me. Father, make me. I mean, he has a really bad idea of what his father will make him. He thinks his father will make him just a servant in his home. But do you see how he's shifted away from saying the world revolves around what I can get from the people around me? And actually, it's time to go back into this context and say, not, Father, give me some more. Like, I need another cash advance. Could I maybe have my brother's share of the estate as well? No, Father, make me. I want to come into your household and I want to submit to your wisdom and your picture of what life could look like. And I think it's really dangerous to stop short and go, okay, I'm going to get fed up and I'm going to own up, without being willing to offer up as well, because this is what thriving spiritually involves, you see. Christianity is not this thing where we get fed up and we own up and we say, okay, God, I've got this. I'm more resolved than ever that I'm going to go out and do good in the areas I've done bad. I'm owning it. I'm owning my stuff. This is not a journey like away from God saying, okay, thanks, I've got it. It's a journey towards God to say, God, I realize I'm an impatient man. I realize I'm an angry woman. I realize whatever it is in your particular case. And if that's going to change after so many years of it not changing, God, I'm going to need your help. Father, make me. Make me patient. Make me forgiving. Make me kind. Make me Christ-like. The beautiful thing is God comes through. In fact, the story talks about transformation. The biblical word in the original for transformation is the word metamorpho, where we get our English word from. It's this beautiful concept of maybe having been one thing for a really long time, something you're comfortable with and you know this is me. You can picture a caterpillar just going, this is how life works. I crawl. I'm one color. Life is slow. But being willing to trust a process greater than itself to come out the other side being something entirely unimaginably different and more beautiful and more free. And I want to encourage us that we be the kind of people, if we're going to thrive spiritually, the Bible certainly doesn't say, here are some principles to live by. It says, here is a person to draw near to. Draw near to the Father. And freshly move away from a habit that says, give me a parking place near the mall entrance, give me good results on my exams, give me great, really well-behaved teenagers. Father, give me. And those are good things. Hey, we all pray them. I pray them regularly. Father, would you make me? Make me the kind of person that could take this label, Christian, into the workplace more effectively. Our city is dying for Christians that would walk into the workplace and actually bring something of the freshness of Jesus. Not just walk in with a label that allows them to be spiritually superior, but actually they behave exactly the same around the boardroom table or in their financial dealings or in the rumor mill that's churning up chaos in the company. I don't know, Father, make me somebody who would go and be a refreshing presence to those that you long to minister to. And so I want to conclude. If we're talking about getting fed up, if we're talking about owning up, and we're talking about offering up our lives to thrive spiritually, I want to end with what I think is a really important question. It's this, but what does it feel like? What would it feel like to thrive spiritually? And I think it's a really important question because as we go over the next 6 weeks, I don't think there's a whole lot of a point in discussing the various steps to something if there isn't something of a hunger in you to get to the end point. I'll tell you a week I'm looking forward to. I'm looking forward to thriving physically. I'm not preaching it. They looked at me and said, no, not at the moment. But I'll tell you why I'm really looking forward to it. Is because there was a season in my life where I could run a sub-4 marathon. And so I've tasted what it tastes like to thrive physically. I've tasted what it's like to be at kilometer 23 and go, my goodness, I could keep going for a long time still. I remember the time when I couldn't make 2 kilometers, and now I'm thriving. And so I lean in to something like that because I know where it could end. I mean, my current season is quite similar in that I can cover 4 kilometers in about 42.2 minutes. It's kind of the wrong way around, but I'm looking forward to that. In all seriousness, I think it would be a failure on my behalf just to give you a couple of steps towards thriving without trying to capture what I think the story captures about what a beautiful thing it is to thrive spiritually. Listen to how the story ends. In verse 20, it says, "But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him. He was filled with compassion for him. And he ran to his son, and he threw his arms around him, and he kissed him." I love that. His father stands on his porch looking out into the distance, not with folded arms. Says, "When will that guy be back? When will he come and pay for everything he's done? I've heard rumors that it's going tough out there, and I'm glad." And when he gets back here, he doesn't know the first half of tough. We find a father on his porch, not with his arms folded, but looking with great hope at the horizon, longing for the return of his son. And when he sees his broken, sin-beaten, beleaguered son, his heart breaks further. And he does what no dignified, ancient, Near Eastern man would ever do. Rather than stand on the porch in a dignified way, appropriate of a wealthy landowner of that time, he hikes up his robe, he exposes his legs, and he runs. He covers the distance to his son. And the father said to his servants, "Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it." That's the best part for us in Durbanville, isn't it? There's rump steak at the party. Let's have a feast and celebrate. "For the son of mine was dead and is alive again, and he was lost and he is found." And so they began to celebrate. What does it feel like to thrive spiritually? Well, Jesus tells us through the story that thriving spiritually meets the deepest longings of every human being's soul. And if I were to have a go at what the deepest longings of any human soul are, I would say these 3 things. Every human longs to be known at a deep and real level. Every human longs to be valued. And every human longs to be included, to be known at a deep level, to be valued for who they are, and to be included in love. And the problem with the planet we live on and the way culture works is that you don't get to do all 3. So you kind of got to choose. Because for anyone to know you to the deepest depths of your soul, for anyone to know some of the thoughts you have, and some of the motives you do, even the good things you do out of, to know about your biggest moments of regret, where you lived entirely separated from your values and the theoretical things you said you would never do. The things you did when no one was around and you felt you were getting away with it as a result. Like if anyone were to know all of that, how would you ever be valued and included? And so we live in a world that says you've got to choose, man. And here's our recommendation. Put being fully known to the side so that you can be valued and included. Make sure that Facebook you is the you that people encounter. And this story of the prodigal son comes along and says there is one who knows you to the depth of your soul, the worst of you. There's a father who knows about the son in the pigsty and the wild parties and the ridiculous requests saying, "I wish you were dead, give me what's due to me." There's a father who knows the worst. And his response is to throw open his arms and embrace you. Not in a patronizing moment that says, "Okay, I'm a bit of a softie, and so it's okay." but to restore real dignity and value, put a robe on his shoulders, take something of great worth and drape it over his shoulders to convince him of his worth to this family. And now let's celebrate. Now let's get the rump steak going. The son was lost and he's found. He was dead, but he's alive again. Let's party. And he's included back into community. And for me, my experience of following Christ has been multifaceted. I felt that Christianity has given me a system to make sense of the world in incredible ways. It's given me some principles that when I apply them, things generally go well for me. But those things are so secondary to the thriving that comes from on a regular basis, just being freshly aware that I am fully known to the core of my being, and I am fully valued by a Father who created me to live the kind of life Jesus lived, and yet my paths looked a little more meandering than that. And I'm fully included in a beautiful church community of people that are all on this same journey of going, this is how we intended to live, and this is how we often live. And we're worshiping a God that makes up the distance between those two things in grace. And I'm included here, and I'm included in his family, and I'm included in heavenly eternity. This is news that is too good to be true. And I would suggest that it's the perfect description of what it means to thrive spiritually. I'm going to ask the musicians to come up, and I'm going to ask the rest of us to stand, because I'd specifically like to pray for two groups of people this morning. And so I want to just describe the two groups of people I want to pray for, and then I'm going to give us an opportunity to respond in prayer. I'd love to pray for you today. If this has never described you, maybe you're kind of a Christian in the cultural sense, you were born into a family and you adopted your parents' values, and maybe you would even say, hey, I've been a churchgoer at various stages. But this incredible love of the Father has never marked your soul in a way that's changed you forever. And I would love to pray that today would be an absolute quantum leap in your spiritual journey into a place where you are known and you are valued and you are included by this amazing Father of heaven. And so in a couple of moments, I'm going to ask those people to pop up their hands. I'm not going to make you do anything and come to the front or anything. I just would love to know who I'm praying for. And then the second group of people I'd love to pray for are just people who know that they have followed Christ. And they've even known they've tasted some of this. But the current reality is just, man, this series has come at a good time, because I'm a long way off. And things have got rather dusty. And I've had some doubts. And I've remembered distant lands that were a lot better than the current reality of what I'm experiencing. I'd love to pray for those people, that this series would be the kickoff to freshness and newness in your faith walk. And so I'm going to ask us all just to bow our heads in prayer. And if you specifically, you've never lived in the reality of coming under God's love, you've never crossed this line of faith, I want to give you an opportunity now just to pop up your hand for a moment so that I can just know who I'm praying for. Just briefly pop it up and pop it back down. Anyone who would love me just to pray for you in that regard? Wonderful. Father, I want to just stand with someone who has just said, it's time for a fundamental shift of what spirituality means, a fundamental shift away from principles and religion into the family of God, into the love of the Father. And God, I want to stand and just pray. Prayer I prayed once many years ago, but have continued to pray. God, forgive me of my sin. Forgive me of my wandering. Forgive me of my false belief that I could do this without your help. I deeply need your presence in my life. Jesus, thank you for your perfect life and your finished work on the cross that causes the Father to look at my life and to judge me not according to my deeds, but according to the perfect righteousness and life of Jesus Christ. I gladly accept his sacrifice on my behalf. Father, I want to pray that you would use these next 6 weeks for your glory in my life. If we could just keep our heads bowed, and anyone who's a Christ follower who just feels God's leading them specifically into a season of new freshness and newness, if you wouldn't mind just popping up your hand very briefly It's wonderful. Love to pray with you. It's beautiful. You're welcome to pop your hands down again. God, we are so amazed that you are so merciful towards us. Although a God as powerful as you should have just spoken once at the beginning and we should have just listened for the rest of our lives, God, we acknowledge our tendency to drift. Think of that hymn that says, prone to wander. Lord, I feel it, prone to leave the one I love. Here's my heart, Lord. Take and seal it for thy courts above. God, we want to freshly offer up today. Say, Father, make us. I want to take our eyes off saying, Father, give us, give us, give us. Say, Father, would you make us? Would you make us sons and daughters, convinced that we're known to the core and yet loved to the core? And God, I just pray for every person that's going to be on this journey over the next 6 weeks. I pray for freshness and vitality in our spiritual walks. We're so thankful you could have created us to just serve you in kind of obliged and dry ways, but you've told us that if we'll serve you with all our hearts, we'll find deep soul satisfaction in the process. So we freshly present our hearts to you and ask that this would be a significant season in our journey.